All right, let's talk Family of Spies by Christine Kuehn. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing her name right. It's going to be Keen or Kuhn. But anyways, this book, we'll read the subtitle to you. It's a World War II story of Nazi espionage, betrayal, and the secret behind Pearl Harbor. I guess the central kind of question and theme behind this book is, what would you do if you found out that in your family there was a history of being a Nazi spy? Pretty crazy question. And when I started reading this, or when I first heard about this book, I was expecting this to be, I don't know, so much more historical. Like, I was expecting it to have happened so long ago. And of course, the World War II stuff happened, much further back. But the story of this book and the sort of the tale that she's telling is recent, which was what makes this really interesting. So anyways, a little bit about the book, and then we'll talk more about kind of some of my takeaways. But essentially, Christine, growing up in her family, notices that all of her immediate family, including like her dad especially, and then her grandparents, aunts, uncles, they're all very hesitant to ever talk about their history, their family history, even when she asks basic questions. They essentially just change the topic. And she doesn't think anything of it for a while, but eventually it just kind of gets to the point where it is a little bit odd, and they just basically change the topic anytime she's trying to figure something out, to the point where sometimes it's hard to even line up some of the stories that she's hearing. So as a kid growing up, she just feels like she doesn't know much about her family history, which is, as you get older in life, obviously something that you think more about. So anyways, life goes on, and I think it was somewhere in the mid-90s, she receives a letter in the mail, which was still big back then, from a director or producer in Hollywood that's looking to write a movie about her dad. And this director sort of spills the beans on the fact that, hey, we want to talk about your dad's family history with the Nazis. And this really triggers something in her mind where she's like, okay, I've sort of known something was up for a long time. And it starts her on a path of searching and trying to figure out her family history and lineage. And so I guess I should have said earlier, this is a true story. It's an incredible story, one unlike one that I've ever read before, where she basically at that point kind of becomes like a journalist, an investigative journalist, but she's doing it on her own family. And, she's never written a book before prior to this, but she has adjacent careers. On the back here, it says she's had a career in journalism, public relations, and nonprofits, but she hadn't written a book before. And so she just goes on this deep dive on her family history and finds out that, yeah, sure enough, her family, particularly her dad's parents, were integral in the Nazis and the Axis power attacking Pearl Harbor, which is crazy. Again, something I was not expecting when I was reading this book. I was expecting like kind of parallel ties, but these people, her family, end up being like central figures to the spying and espionage that happens to get the Japanese to bomb Pearl Harbor. And obviously at the time, Japan and Germany were sort of working together. So absolutely crazy story. Takeaways from this book for me were a couple things. One is there's a big theme of this book is what happens to her dad. So her dad grows up her dad's parents were the ones that were the spies. And her dad's parents, I believe they had 3 kids, and 2 of them sort of knew about the spying, the espionage, but her dad, the author's dad, Christine's dad, did not. He actually grew up in Hawaii because they lived in Hawaii. They were sent over here by Germany to do the spying, not knowing anything different, right? To him, America was the land of the free and the brave. That's all he knew. He was supporting America. And then come to find out when everything goes down that his parents were spies, and there's court cases. He had to testify against his parents. He's shamed for obvious reasons. He lives a life of shame to the point where he tucks that in a box and never wants to talk about it again, and never mentions it to his daughter until one day she brings it up to him after this producer or director comes to her with that note. and he's very hesitant to tell his story. He only delivers it in bits and pieces. He's very ashamed. He's emotional. He even reverts at times when she brings it up to him. He reverts back to his old story, or his old lies, if you want to call it that, because he's just so used to doing it his whole life. And it's like, you think about that, like what happens to the family members of people that were a part of atrocities in any shape or form? Like her dad didn't do anything wrong, and you find that out in this book. But it's controversial, right? To think about, like, there are families of Nazi spies. People died in Pearl Harbor, Americans, because of this family. So, where does it end? Where does the blame end? It's a crazy thing to think about, really, and something that I thought a lot about after reading this book. The other thing that you think a lot about is just your family history. I often wonder, as I get older, what's behind, what's in my family history, what I even want to know. I mean, it seems like there are so many of us, especially now, that where things are more accessible, right? You can go in and find out your family history. I'm sure there's things in all of our families that we would not be proud of. Obviously, being Nazi spies would be kind of the head of that list. But it's just something crazy to think about, sort of how you would feel, what you would have to kind of go through growing up, knowing that. And again, I thought for Christine, the author, I thought it was pretty courageous to kind of confront this, have these conversations with her dad, who sadly ends up getting dementia during this process, and she never ends up getting the full story. But it's just a lot. I think this book really delivers. It delivered more than I was expecting. It gives you crazy things to think about. It's a story about love and betrayal and obviously espionage and all those things. It's not very long. It's a quick, fun, fast read. It's historical in the topic, but it's like a current event, and that she's writing this story all in through the 2000s and sort of weaving her own tale into it as she goes and finds these things. So, who should read this book? I think for me, the draw to it was I like true crime books, and that's what drew me to it. Is it sounded like a true crime book. But there's also a lot of cool history stuff in this book. I mean, I had no idea that there were German families in America, specifically in Hawaii, that were doing spying on behalf of Japan. I don't know, I guess I just never thought about that. And then there's even stuff about how much the FBI knew and what their sort of limitations were at the time and failures. So yeah, true crime, historical fans. If you're just looking for a good story, in some ways it's a memoir, I think this would be a great book. So did this book deliver? Absolutely. I thought that this was a fantastic book. Family of Spies is a good book that I would recommend to a lot of people, because it hits on so many different topics. I think that there's a lot of different people who would enjoy a book like this. So hope you enjoy it. If you have questions, feel free to throw them in the comments. Thanks for watching.